Welcome to the CCC Confer Conference Center. For security verification, please enter your passcode followed by the pound or hash key. Please hold. Thank you. Your passcode is confirmed. Please, when you hear the tone, you will be the second person to join the meeting.
All right, I'm going to switch back to CCC Confer. Can everybody just tell? Okay, great. Thank you so much for letting me know that. Awesome. Unfortunately, that's going to come across in recording, but that's the way it goes. Okay. As I had said earlier, but you guys couldn't hear me, I have been struggling with Comcast for 3 weeks to fix a horrendous problem with a new service that we tried to get clear back in November. And finally, a repair person came out today, and we thought it was all taken care of. But when he left, we realized that he had disconnected my business phone, which is not even governed by Comcast, it's governed by AT&T. Anyway, I've had messages from several of you who can feel my pain, and I feel yours because I know that it's never easy working with all of our online issues. Okay. So we are going to be focusing on graphic frames tonight. Some of it will be review, some of it will be new, and what I'm hoping is that things that you know you'll feel comfortable with, and then these new details will come much easier because you won't be overwhelmed with too much information. So hopefully this will consolidate a lot of the information that we've learned about graphic frames and even more. As a quick review, we know that the graphic frames can be filled with all types of imported images, from JPEG to GIF to Photoshop files, Illustrator files, TIFF, EPS. All of these standard image formats can be imported into InDesign. What's preferable, if you can, is to get native Illustrator and Photoshop files, especially if those images are complex. And the reason I say that is when you are importing images into InDesign, if they are native Illustrator and Photoshop, there are a lot of things you can change by turning on and off layers, by allowing a clipping path to be incorporated into the image, so that's going to impact text wrap, which we talked about last week. A graphic artist could prepare a Photoshop file that would have 3 different versions. We call them different types of comps. And depending on where you were laying that out, let's say you're working for a magazine and it was in the ad section. There was a blue version of the ad and there was a pink version of the ad. And it just so happened that where you were placing that ad, there were too many other blue images, so you needed to put in the pink. Without having to go back to the graphic artist, you could just choose the comp that worked best for that situation. So it's always really nice to have Photoshop and Illustrator files if you can, but it's not required. All right, I want to just review real quickly the different types of importing methods. I'm not going to go through all of them to demonstrate them because we've done some of these quite a bit, but to place an image, I have several different options. I can go to my selection tool and choose File, Place, or use the Control-D, keyboard equivalent. And when I open that file, I can either click, which will bring that image in its full size. Now this is huge, right? It's taking up almost all of my 2-page spread because it's a very high resolution image. And in Photoshop, I did not tell Photoshop to size it to, let's say, 3 by 6 or 4 by 6 and to increase that resolution proportionately. So I'm going to undo that. Again, with a loaded cursor, we've done this before as well. I can drag, which gives me a proportional frame according to that matches the original dimensions of the graphic, and when I let go, it will fit perfectly in that frame. Another option we have is to draw a graphic frame and then when let me go into non-preview mode so you guys can see the frame. When I import now that same exact image, in the upper left-hand corner, if I place my loaded cursor up above the frame. Now, right now, that cursor is not hovering over any existing frame. It's just against the background of the page. As I move that cursor over into the frame, can everybody see the parens that are appearing now on either side of the paintbrush? I'm hoping that's coming across in the webcast. So outside of an existing image, InDesign knows it's going to be responsible for creating the frame that that image is going to go into. But as I hover over an existing frame, it's saying to me, okay, I see this frame, can I use it? And if I click, it will use that existing frame. Now, it will not be proportional. It's going to come in full size, but it is being cropped inside of that frame. You can see the screened back image. All right, I'm going to undo placing that again. And here's another method. If I click on an existing frame and I import an image yet again, without being prompted or getting a loaded cursor, you notice that it just uses that frame exactly as is, as if I had hovered over the top of it and dropped it in. I'm just sorry, I was just looking over it to see if anybody was saying anything. So you can see we've got lots of different options for bringing images into InDesign. And of course, we also have the method of using mini bridge. So I could go to, actually I could just load bridge and then go into compact mode. I'm not going to do that right at the moment just because I don't want to go in and reshare that application. But you remember bridge acts as a separate application, and then you can go in and you can compact that view, and you can just drag images into InDesign. And I can do that from my desktop as well. I don't use that method because in most cases I want InDesign to take up my entire monitor. I don't want to have to resize my application window, go to my desktop, open a folder, and then try to drag that image in. But that may work for your workflow. That's just not, this doesn't tend to be a preference of mine. All right. Let's see, let me make sure that I'm just looking at, I've written so many notes on this so I don't forget anything. We've talked about dragging into place to get a constrained and scaled graphic. Moving the loaded pointer over either an empty area or a frame. If the frame is already selected using File Place, puts it in there automatically. When you hear the webcast on text frames, I'd go the opposite direction as I'm going to talk about right now. Let's say that you have a text frame. I'm just going to draw one out here. And this is definitely specified for text. I know that now because it has a text insertion blinking in the top left-hand corner. I hope that's coming through on the webcast as well. But if I switch tools, even though this is still a text frame, and I can confirm that by going to my Object menu, going to Content, and I can see, sure enough, there's a check mark next to text. But if that frame is selected when I import an image, and we're getting tired of that Flagstaff one, let's go back to the eagle here. Look what just happened. On the fly, InDesign converted this frame from a text frame to an image frame. And I know sometimes it just seems like it's going to cause a real pain in your workflow because you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, how easy is it to make mistakes in InDesign? That part is true. But the benefit of this is, number one, you have the flexibility to change your mind on the fly and not have to regenerate these frames. As I said in the text frame webcast, There was a time when if you did not draw a text frame, you couldn't convert it. You had to delete what you had just done and you had to start over with a new type of frame because a graphic frame could only hold images. A text frame could only hold text. But now we have the ability to just constantly be changing our mind. But it makes it very easy for us to do the wrong thing. And I can't tell you how many times in a month I'm rushing through a project, trying to meet a client deadline, and I leave something selected on the screen. I import an image and I think that nothing is selected, and sure enough, my text frame gets filled, or vice versa. I have an image frame selected accidentally, and I import text, and it changes it and swaps it out. The other good news is that by just pressing Control or Command Z, I can immediately undo what I just did. And notice that instead of placing that image in the, or just completely undoing this, it gives me an extra option of getting a loaded cursor, where I didn't have that loaded cursor previously because I had selected the frame. So now, even though this frame is still selected, I have the option of dragging out a frame below, which is really nice. I don't think I could ask for anything more from the engineers to help me avoid mistakes or to correct my mistakes. All right. On that same note, the fact that we can place an image into just about any path, I'm going to go ahead and delete these two. As we learned from the webcast where we talked about converting text to outlines and then putting the image inside of those outlines, I think it makes it pretty clear that even if I draw some obscure shape, and this is pretty bizarre here, I have the ability to fill this with an image. And I may have to increase the size of that image. And let's see if I can go up to my scale commands up here in my control panel. I'm just going to significantly increase this so that it takes up the entire shape. And that's pretty ugly, but I think it makes the point. So you've got all of your regular shapes that you can create. We had talked about the polygon tool, which is one of my favorite tools. And if I double click on that tool, I can preset those polygon settings. So in this case, I want 10 size and I want the start inset to be 20%, which is what changes it from this little default shape that you see as the polygon tool versus the shape that I'm drawing here, my little star shape. And again, I can just bring in an image. And in this case, it came in as full size. I'm going to switch tools here to my content tool. And I can see that this image is absolutely huge. Let me hold that down for just a second, right? So what am I going to do? Am I going to try to resize that like I did the eagle? Probably not, because this image is so much bigger. So instead what I'm going to do is go to one of my fill buttons, or right click, go to fitting, and say fill frame proportionally. And I meant fitting button, sorry about that. And now I've got this ridgeback sitting in here. All right. Again, if I do an undo, it reloads. I'm going to go back a couple places. I'm just continued to do Control Z, and eventually I get my loaded cursor again. Control Shift or Command Shift Z goes back in the other direction. So I can go forward through those steps just as easily as I can go backward through my undos. So Shift Command or Shift Control Z will move backwards or forwards through my action. Now we had an entire webcast on using the grid feature. So I'm just holding down this tool to get my rectangle tool back. And remember that you As you drag out to get the full width, you use your arrow keys to give you that grid. And in most cases, that's when you want to place multiple images. Most people have some sort of a catalog spread going on or something very similar to that. And now, see, I have 1, 2, 3, how many do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And just as a reminder, the number of images I have is sitting right there next to my paintbrush. Okay, outside of the frame, the parens are gone. Inside the frame, the parens are there. So I can just click, 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 click. And now I'm going to select all of these. And instead of using my right click, fitting fill frame proportionally, I'm going to go ahead and click on the icon that does the same thing. And now all of these are filled. So that should be very familiar to you because we just got through doing that. All right, one other thing I want to say about this importing is to pay attention. And let me go to details here so that we can look at these file extensions. Pay attention to your file extensions to help you figure out which type of image you are importing. So for example, AI is a native Illustrator file. We have JPEG, TIFF, as I said, EPS. A native Photoshop file will be PSD. And you can also import InDesign files. And you can import InDesign pages. When you import an InDesign file, it's very similar to importing a PDF file. And usually if a PDF file has multiple pages and an InDesign file might have multiple pages, you're going to need to tell InDesign during the import, during that place command, what pages you want. So I want to talk about that just for a moment. Let me see if I can find an appropriate file here. That is one thing that I did not. How about I use the student lab cards? Maybe not. Oh, I know what I can do. I can just use the help file. This is another thing I would encourage everybody to do. On my desktop, I keep a folder called Adobe Reference, and if any of you are working in multiple applications at the same time, for instance, let's say you have the Creative Suite, remember that all the help files can be downloaded as PDF books, and then you can go ahead and access them at any time, even if you don't have an internet connection. So anytime there's an upgrade, I always go up and I download a particular file. So let me just say that I've got something clear back in CS4 and I want to look up how something worked in that version. This is the exact same way this is going to work in a PDF and in an InDesign file. I need to show my import options in order to get the prompt as to how many pages I want. So I click Open. This is a huge file. It's 711 pages. And I can bring these in one at a time. Let me just go to a page that has maybe an image in it. There's one that has a table. It might be helpful. Okay. And I can say that I want to bring in just that previewed page. I could bring in all the pages, which would probably overwhelm my system at the moment. Or I could say I want a range of pages, maybe 20 to 23. If I bring in a single page, so I'm going to leave this highlighted, previewed page. I have this box selected. Just like I said, I'm going to do a Control-Z so I can get that page hovering. And I'm just going to draw that page. Now this is an 8.5 by 11 page, so obviously it's very small here. But you can see that it acts like any other image. The beauty of the PDF, though, is that if I keep zooming in, and I should be able to Go to high display. Look at the clarity of that. And that's because the PDF is a format from text that was never rasterized. So if your input is not rasterized in a PDF, it won't be rasterized when you bring it into InDesign. It is a wonderful way to do forms, anything that you're having to reference to an audience. Okay, now let's say that instead I decide that I want to bring in multiple pages of that same file. Let's go with, in this case, let's go with Illustrator. Where's my little Illustrator file? Here we go. Be sure those import options are turned on. Click Open. And this time I'm going to, let's see if I can find, oh, there was a picture of something. There we go. So that's page 12. So I'm going to say I want page 12 to 12, 13, 14, 14. Now, in addition to this, this becomes a real pain when you're bringing in PDF files. If you don't set the crop, sometimes you get an image that is much bigger than you really want. For example, if I was to bring in a PDF file that had a single postcard on it, if I crop to, for instance, all visible layers or the bounding box, what's going to happen is it's going to give me the entire 8.5 by 11 page. In addition to that image, it's going to bring in all the white space around it. Now in this case, for pages 12 through 14, that works well for me. But like I said, if it was just a small business card or a single image that was converted from, let's say, Illustrator to a PDF, then I would probably want something like the media or whatever was specified as the crop. All right, I'm going to go ahead and leave this with the bounding box. Click OK. And now I have multiple PDF pages. This is going to be very similar to when I just imported those 6 images. So each time I click and drag, there's going to be another page waiting in the wings until all 3 of these have been laid out. So again, this method is very consistent with other things that you've been doing. This same method was how we laid out these multiple images, and now I'm able to do the same thing here. With an InDesign file, it's very similar. So let me go ahead and import this. Let's see here. Let me get to my class files. This is a good one. These were the instructions to Lab 3. And I believe that is a multi-page file, so go ahead and click Open. Oh, no, sorry. I didn't want the PDF. I wanted the InDesign file. Okay. Right? Because I'm supposed to be showing you how to import an InDesign file. So this is a 3-page file. This was the sample for the slide presentation. And I want all the pages. Or actually, let's just do the 1 page. Click OK, because I want this to be big enough for everybody to see. Now remember, this is an InDesign file. It's not an Illustrator file or Photoshop. This is something that was created in InDesign. So I drag across. Of course, this is going to be much smaller than it is in its regular size. And if I zoom in, you can see this is absolutely crystal clear. The really cool thing about this is in my links panel, it tells me that this is an InDesign file. And if I go to edit it, which is my little pencil down here in the bottom right-hand corner, it will open up that InDesign file. Anyway, it's kind of weird. It's like, you know, something being inside something, like a set of mirrors. Okay. A couple reminders about methods for working with our graphics. We know we have the content grabber, which is not coming across. It's so weird how some nights this works and some nights it doesn't. So tonight I'm not getting a little circle, and I don't know if it's coming through on your webcast, but it's definitely like coming through on my second monitor. But we have the little circle in the center that allows us to hold our mouse button down, count 1, 2, and 3, and as we start to move I can see the rest of the image, and I can move that image, crop that image, right? I have the option of using the direct selection tool, which basically is the content grabber wherever you select. Everything is going to select just, wherever you click is going to select just the image, not the frame and the image. Okay? If you select a frame and you don't select a content grabber, remember that resizing a corner only resizes the frame. It does not resize the graphic with it. If I use my scale commands while the image is selected with the selection tool, I can scale both the image and its frame by resizing this up or down. I also have the option of clicking on the image with my content grabber, going into one of the resize handles, and let me zoom in. This is probably way too small here. All right, so can everybody see I've got, let me let that redraw itself. And I will answer that question in just a second. So I'm clicking on this, holding down my Shift key. I'm resizing the image independently of the frame. And notice that if I look up in my scale command, it says 13%. That's 13% of the original scale. But if I scale something, let me undo this, using the selection tool, it keeps resetting itself back to 100. I know we've talked about this before. So anytime I want to know how much smaller this is than the original, I either click on the content grabber, that little donut in the center, tells me the real difference between the original and what I have imported, or I use my object selection tool. So I'm looking down at this question, is it best to downsize the files on individual Photoshops rather than all of them in the PDF compression output and color images? It really depends. If you are working with a lot of images that you're having to bring into a file, it's very easy to just select the frames and say you either want to fill the frames proportionally or you want to fit the frames proportionally. And especially if you're using the same images in multiple documents, then it's almost easier to do it in InDesign. I used to tell people emphatically, always resize your Photoshop images before you put them into InDesign. Make them the exact size you want them. And that was because the larger the image, the larger the output would be. But today we have so many options when we export that we are allowed to have the PDF process cut off the rest of the image. For example, I have all this extra image that's not showing, right? Over here on the left and over here on the right. That is going to increase the size of the PDF if the PDF does not get rid of that extra that's not showing. And that option is what allows you to make a smaller PDF and use only the part of the image that is visible in InDesign. So at this point, I don't think that I would say one way or the other that you should do an image ahead of time. The most important thing to do, and we're going to talk about this next, is making sure that you have enough pixels to print this effectively. So this image, if I look in my links panel, was originally 150 ppi at the size it was created at, which the dimensions of that size were 1500 by 1000. But now, because I have reduced its size, I have pulled those pixels closer together. Now it has an effective ppi of 425, which is well beyond what I need to make a very clear printout. All right, we're going to get into that in just a moment. I'm going to talk more about that, but I just want to make sure I've covered all of these. Don't forget that clicking on the content grabber and hitting the backspace key will delete the image without the frame. If you click on an image outside of the content grabber with the selection tool and you hit your backspace key, you delete the image and the frame. If you want to resize the frame and the image, remember you're going to want the Shift key down to keep it proportional, and you are going to want to add either the Control or the Command key so that InDesign resizes both the frame and the image. Control Shift drag for the PC, Command Shift drag for the Mac. So as I drag, it's going to resize both the image and the frame. Again, much of this should be review for everyone because you've been working with this now for several weeks. Okay, I think I've gone through the fitting command several times, so I don't want to spend much time with this, but hopefully there aren't any more questions about this. Fill frame proportionally is what I use most often when I've been teaching the class. It's going to take the shortest amount of space and it's going to fill the frame so that you don't have any extra white space. And just think of it that way. Fill frame proportionally means that every part of a frame is going to have a pixel in it. Fit content proportionally usually means that you're going to have some white space that is going to be sticking out. And at some point you will have to either fit the frame to the content. You see now I have a much smaller frame, but it's fitting exactly to the content. Let me undo that twice. We have center content. As I said, that comes in really handy when you've accidentally moved your image outside of your frame. Excuse me. And you don't know where it is because you've deselected. So I can right click and, or actually in this case I'm not even going to get on the image. So I'm just going to go up here to my icon in the control panel, which is center image, and it goes right back to the center. And that's all that I'm going to go over with that, except to say that remember that each one of these first 5 are listed up here. So this left one is fill, fit, what is that? I think that's fit. Let's see, fill frame proportionally, fit content proportionally. This is fit the frame to the image, and this is center the image. I'm trying to think, what is that little one there? I'm not getting my pop-ups. Fit content, oh right, fit content to frame. And of course the reason I never use that is because if you're doing that with a photo, it's going to disproportionately size that. So if you have people in the image, that's not going to be a good idea. All right, I think that is it. Oh, except for AutoFit. Remember that if you click on AutoFit and then you change the size of that frame, and I'm going to change the size of the frame without holding down the key to resize the image. Notice that immediately it resizes the image. Okay, not size dimension but pixels on particular images. It's really the same thing because remember in Photoshop we are not talking about inches or pikas. All Photoshop understands is pixels. So what you need to do in Photoshop is just be sure that when you're looking at an image that you've taken, a digital image, and it says it has, 1,500 pixels by 1,000, is that going to break down to have enough pixels per inch for the size of the image? For example, you take a digital image on your iPhone, okay, and you want to blow that up to an 11 by 17. Chances are you're not going to have enough pixels for that, but it's going to look beautiful at 1 inch by 1 inch. So I usually will go into Photoshop these days, not so much to size, but to find out how many pixels I've got, if it's going to have enough pixels for the size image. But InDesign is now giving me that information pretty well as well. So I find that I don't do as much in Photoshop with resizing as I used to. I use it more just to correct images. I hope that makes sense. All right, let's go forward with some frame extras here. Okay, I'm going to move over to this other page for this. I have 3 different frames. One is filled with just a fill color. One has a photograph, and one has a vector image, and then I have one text frame. And I want to show you some methods for getting information about an image. We've got 2 main sources of information. One is our links panel, which we talked about before, and one is our info menu. So let me bring that panel up. I'm going to go to the window menu. And sorry, I was looking at Larry's question here. Hang on. Let me bring this over here and set it. Okay. Larry, did I answer that question? Okay, great. All right, so this panel, which is usually on by default in the dock, I don't, as you've probably noticed, I don't keep it in my dock, and I always think about why I don't, and probably the biggest reason why I don't is because it is strictly an informational panel. It does have lots of information, and it's not looking really good right now because of the low resolution. It's placing icons right on top of text, but and that's just because I'm at a lower resolution than my monitor likes right now. But let me show you some of the things that you can get from this panel. If I click on a frame that has a fill and it has a stroke, the main information I usually want is my width and my height information and my X and my Y coordinates. Remember, we talked about these really early on in the class. If you think about the Cartesian coordinate system in geometry, you have an x-axis and a y-axis. And if you divide that x, if you cross the x-axis and y-axis over the top of each other like a cross, the bottom right-hand corner is a lot like the page. I have my 0 point at the very top left corner. Let me move this over, and you can see I've got 0 on my horizontal ruler and 0 on my vertical ruler. So what this is telling me is that this particular image, from its top left corner, and my little proxy buttons are what are going to give me what corner it's going to focus on in this image. It's telling me that currently, let me move this up here. Oh, that's kind of interesting. It's not accurately displaying that, which I think is kind of interesting here. And I don't know whether that's a resolution issue, but this XY should match this XY right here in my information panel. You can see that it's not. It is giving me the accurate width and the accurate height. Notice that this number matches my width up here. My height matches this one exactly. The D is the distance of an object or tool that a tool has moved relative to its starting position. And again, I'm not seeing that either. So like I said, I'm not sure whether this is a resolution problem with my monitor, but let's move on to these others and we'll talk about each of them. Okay, so going back to this object that just has a fill and a stroke, Notice that it's showing me that the fill is an RGB fill. It's giving me the relative numbers. It's telling me that the stroke is a Pantone 2593. Let's just double check that with our swatches panel, which is also going to give me the same information. Holding my swatches panel open, I see that the stroke icon is in front and it's highlighting the Pantone 2593. So sure enough, that's exactly what the info palette's telling me. And if I bring my fill icon to the front, I can see that the fill is RGB 51, 153, 255. And sure enough, 51, 153, and 255. So that is accurate. I like the fact that the info panel changes with the information that you select. And that's always really nice. It's just that I can't interact with the object using this like I can in some other panels. So let's just take a look at a photograph now. For a photo, it's telling me, again, I have my X, Y, and my width and height. That's great. That's going to be consistent across all of these items. And it's also telling me that this is a JPEG. Its actual PPI was 300, but because I've shrunk it so far, it's now at 1035. And it uses an RGB color space, and it actually has an ICC profile attached to it. So in Photoshop, we can attach ICC profiles, and if there is one attached to an image, then I will see it here, and it's just standard sRGB color profile. Now, let's talk a moment here about actual PPI and effective. This is one of the things you should always be checking when you're importing images, as I said earlier. Let's talk about what numbers are real important here. 72 PPI is good for screen resolution, so screen viewing. All right, but it's not going to look good even on your home inkjet printer. It's going to be pretty fuzzy. For an inkjet printer that you have in your home or at the school, you're going to need at least 150 to about 200. And in fact, now the printers are getting higher and higher in quality as technology is changing. You might even want something closer to 240 to 300 PPI. And I'm just going to put in here home and school. Or actually, I should say home, school, and business. All right. If you're going to go to an offset printer, a professional print shop, they are going to want something much closer to 300 PPI. All right, so keep these numbers in mind, because one of the last projects you're going to do is you're going to create a brochure that is going to need to be not professionally printed, but you're going to want to print it on either the school printer or maybe a printer from work, or see if a friend will let you use their inkjet. So make sure that you are keeping this in mind for each of these images. And as you resize images, you've got to check to be sure that at that point you've got enough pixels. And these are going to be the minimums you're going to need. And for printing this final project, you're going to need probably, you could probably get away with between 150 and 200. All right, for a vector image, again, I have my X, Y, and my width and my height. But notice that the type says Adobe PDF, and that's because an Illustrator file and a PDF have the exact same code. So you can open up an Illustrator file. There's an Illustrator PDF format, and I can also open up a PDF file in Illustrator and kind of monkey around with it. I use that sometimes to troubleshoot a PDF that people are having problems with. I wouldn't make it a habit of doing it. I use this as a measure just because I'm trying to get some answers and I can't seem to get them. All right, so that's your info panel. I can look at these exact same things in my links panel, but my links panel is only going to show me images that I have placed in the document. In this case, it's showing me the image. You guys have all seen that before. But in the bottom portion of this, notice that I've got this little selected with a little triangle here, and this is how you're going to expand that to get this other information, this link info, which I think is so important. And one more thing I want to say about that info panel, because I just realized that you guys might not default to the same as mine. In the info panel, up in the top right corner, it's panel menu. You have show content offset, or actually go ahead and leave that on, but just you can choose to hide options. And sometimes that's the default on some people's machines. So if you're not seeing that bottom information, make sure you go to the menu and choose show options. That's going to be the same in the links panel. I've got to be sure that I have this rolled down so I can see this information. Now we're not getting our XY information. We're not even getting our width height, which I don't mind because it's right here across my control panel. But what I really like here is that it's giving me lots of other information that I'm going to need to make an effective judgment about this particular file. First of all, it is showing me that it's the RGB color space, so I know that if I'm going to print this in CMYK, I'm going to need to make some modifications either in the PDF or I'm going to have to make this change in Photoshop. But more importantly, this is what I'm always watching when I'm creating some project. I am making sure that that effective PPI does not drop below what the minimum is going to be for the print solution that I have. So I'm just going to zoom out here. I'm going to pull this image over here. And I'm going to size this absolutely huge. Now I just went from something like 1,000 PPI here to 141. You can see that in my links panel. The size of this is about 110 picas by 73. So let me just quickly switch to inches so everybody has some point of reference here. So I've made this a width of 18 inches by 12 inches. So let's say I wanted to make a small poster. Okay, I'm really getting below my boundary here. 141 is not going to give me the crispest look of that image. So a lot of you might be making calendars for family members. I know that's something that's one of our favorite things in our family is to do a surprise calendar, and InDesign has lots of free templates to make a family calendar or a dog calendar or cat calendar, whatever. So you're going to need those images much bigger. So again, when you click on the image, make sure that you are checking this effective PPI. And I'm just going to undo these real quick. All right. When you're working with a vector image, you're not going to have to worry about its PPI. And you'll notice that it's not even listed now because a vector, again, is made of segments. And as you resize, it's going to fill each of those little segments with the color that's assigned to it. So I can blow this up from here to eternity, and as long as the printer, I had a big enough printer to print it, it's going to print absolutely crystal clear. See if there's any layer overrides. It's giving me the creator, the place date, what layer it is on. One of the things I do use quite often is the path. So sometimes I don't remember where the image was before and I can't find it. And I look at the path and it tells me the last location that it knew of when it was imported, and that sometimes helps me figure out where that file might be. Okay, I just want to be sure I've gone through my notes here to make sure I've covered everything. All right, well, a couple more selection options here. I'm looking at this text box. And one of the things I didn't talk about, we've gone through the images, but I want to just make a comment real quick about what you see in a text box when you're in your type tool inside of a text box. Notice that this text originated, or it's editable in InDesign, and I'm not seeing this as a link because by default text is not linked inside of InDesign. So this isn't going to really give me much information. It's not an imported link that it keeps record of. But in this case, the info panel might actually give me something more than the links panel. If I click in this text box, again, I'm seeing the XY and the WH, my width and my height of the frame itself. That really doesn't have anything to do with the individual characters. But in the other options, I can see I've got lots of information here that I wasn't able to get from the links panel. It's telling me that I have 399 characters plus 30. All right, what in the heck is plus whatever here? That is telling me that it's the visible versus what is in the overflow. I hope you can see the red plus sign here. So let me zoom out just a little bit so we can get a bigger box here. I'm going to increase the size of this frame so that I know it can fit the text. Now I'm going to go back to my type tool. And sure enough, now it's telling me I have 429 characters, 66 words, 12 lines, and 3 paragraphs. But the moment this frame becomes too small to hold all the text, and I click with my type tool, I can see that everything after the plus is what is after the overflow. So this is always helpful too if you don't know how much information is left. Another option, we haven't really talked about this, but we do have a story editor. And I'm going to probably do a separate webcast on that, but that will always let you see everything that's in Overflow live. There's not enough time to get into it tonight. All right. So hopefully that will help. Now let's talk about some going back and forth between tools. I'm in the type tool, and I want to get to my selection tool because I want to click on an image, let's say, that might be sitting here above my text box. Of course, I can always go back to my tools, but as you guys are getting better and better at InDesign, and you're working more and more with it, you're going to find that it gets tiring going back and clicking on tools. So I can either press the escape key when you are actively editing text and you are automatically placed in your selection tool. And notice that it went out of text editing mode and now I have the frame itself selected, which is very cool. But now I changed my mind and I want to edit the text. I have two options for this. I can either type T on my keyboard, which changes me to the type tool, and I can just go ahead and start editing, or I can double click in any text box and that also automatically changes tools for me. When you are working with an image and you are not in the content grabber, if I double click, notice that it places me in the content grabber mode without being in the center area. And I can move this around just like I would if I was in the direct selection tool. Older versions of InDesign, if you double clicked on an image, you were taken to the direct selection tool. Now InDesign gives us the functionality of the direct selection tool without changing tools. So if I deselect and I go back in, now I'm back with the functionality that I typically would see with the selection tool. Had this taken me to the direct selection tool, notice it's the exact same functionality, but for me to get out of this, even if I deselect by clicking outside, I'm right back in that direct selection tool. You can see that it just stays in that tool. So again, this is Adobe's engineers constantly trying to provide people using this program with shortcuts and faster ways to move from one task to the next. It's just amazing to me how every single version of InDesign has so many new features that really, in most cases, I feel are very centered around productivity. So if you are working with someone who has an older version of InDesign, these are some of the things that are going to be very different. The functionality going between the selection tool and the type tool, and going between the selection tool and the direct selection tool. All right. I think that is it. We're just about out of time. I see the question, Larry, will it go after the big ones first? I don't know if I understand what that means. What does that mean? Will it go after the big ones first? Let me quickly switch over to this. Images that aren't large in file size. Okay, will it go after the big ones first? Compression of color images to affect the images that aren't large in file size. I'm still not getting the question. Compression of color images to affect the images that aren't large in file size. You mean when you're converting it to a PDF? To the small ones. I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but let's say that I have several images in this file, and some of them have a lot more pixels than others. So the file size for each one of the images that has far greater pixels is always going to be bigger. When I export this to PDF, what it's going to do is I have an option of compression. So right now, when I've been having you guys export to the smallest file size, and let me just put in here compression test really quick. All right. The biggest difference between any of these presets is compression. That is the largest difference between any of these. Now when you get into your PDFXs, this has to do with going to a professional printer, and I'm going to exclude those at the moment. But between press quality, smallest file size, and high quality print, it's all about compression, because compression of rasterized images is what makes your file much smaller, much larger. And that's so funny you're asking this question, because today I was just on the phone with a client that I taught 6 months ago, and they were completely freaking out because a graphic designer had created a 28-page publication for them. And when he created the PDF, it was like a 2 meg file. Someone in the office made a very slight text change, and when they created the PDF, it was 26 megabytes. There is no way they're going to be able to upload this to the web and have the public, this is a government agency, no one is going to want to download a 26 megabyte file. And so when I looked at the InDesign file, there was no reason for it to be this large. So what they didn't know is that they could change the compression on the images. Remember, text and vector images are going to add very little in this and have very little to do with the size of a file. You know, unless you're talking about a 300-page book. Really what it's going to come down to are these rasterized images. So if I take a look at smallest file size, you can see that it's blanket right across the board. It's saying any image, any color image that is over 150 ppi, it's going to throw away everything over 100. So if my image was 600 ppi, it's going to throw away 500 of those pixels. And it's going to use a compression scheme, one of these, whichever you choose, that is going to hopefully do a good job of making it look pretty decent for as small as a file as that is. So your images are broken down into color and grayscale, which usually have the exact same dimensions, and I'm not dimensions, I'm sorry, the pixel compression. Though this one is a little interesting. The grayscale, they're making 150, anything over 225, 150. And then your monochrome images are always much larger. So 100, 150, 150, 225. Now let's just change this real quickly to high quality print. That's a pretty drastic difference. Now it's saying any image over 450 pixels per inch is going to throw away anything over 300. Same thing for grayscale. And then of course for monochrome, it's not going to throw anything away until it sees an image that's over 1800 pixels per inch. Because without the color, it's also going to be much smaller. The rest of this stuff is not going to make that much difference in the file size. It's going to have to do with color spaces and whether the printer needs marks and bleeds and whether you're going to add security to the PDF file. This is really where most of the action happens when someone is saying to you, hey, can you email this to me? Can you make this a smaller file? Or can you please improve the quality of those images? Because at smallest file size, somebody tries to print this on a nice printer at work, your images are going to be really fuzzy. And you're not going to impact the smaller photos because remember, if you have some images, let's say that this image down here was only 150 ppi, but this image above was 300 ppi. In this export, Acrobat is going to ignore any images that are 150 pixels per inch and lower. So it's just going to skip over those images, leave them exactly as they are. It's only going to impact the larger ones. Sometimes things happen without doing something. That's true if you go through the command and you just use the defaults. For example, if I just go into, this is what this client was doing. They said file export. They gave it a name and then they just said save and immediately just clicked export. If we're not watching those settings to make sure that we've chosen the right setting for the right job, we are going to have things happen without us manually changing those things. So this is a good lesson for any of you who are working with posting things on a web for your business. I know some of you are starting businesses or going to move into new businesses. I can, just from some of the communications and pictures. So you're dealing with both images that need to be printed at a high resolution. You're also dealing with files that need to be much smaller so that you can post them to a business website for people to either download and look at or to print themselves. So just pay attention to these. All right, I'm not sure if I understand the sequestered. What do you mean by sequestered? Is that part of the same question? Sometimes things happen without doing something. Sequestered? Oh, joke. That is funny. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. All right. I think that's it for this. I am going to do a separate webcast for the homework, which is going to be lab 7, because I want to go through and I want to dissect it so that everybody feels a lot more comfortable. It's a little overwhelming when you take a look at the lab, and so I'm just going to do that as a separate podcast, and I will make sure that that is done by the end of tomorrow. The homework will not be due for at least another week and a half. I think we have, if I'm looking at my due dates here, and actually I don't want to go over them in the podcast, but we just sent out a reminder on homework. Everybody's doing really well, and we will move forward with looking at Lab 7. And I know you guys are still working on Lab 6, but don't worry. I'm going to give you plenty of time to finish this next one. Okay, thank you everybody. Sorry it went a little bit later tonight. And until next time, everybody keep practicing. Bye-bye.